So welcome everyone to week 3 of Project and Portfolio 2. What I'll be going over today is going to be the wind turbine experiments 3 and 4. So where you'll be at in the end of wind turbine experiment 2 is you can just go ahead and remove the outpost scene or unload it and just have your experiment scene loaded, and you should be able to hit play. Switch over to the scene view, and now you should be able to control your wind turbine with this parameter down here. We have this parameter called toggle spin. So when I turn that on, it should now toggle my animation to play, go into the wind up and then into spinning, and stay spinning until I hit this toggle spin again. So I'm able to control my animation with just this parameter. So what we're going to do next in the scripting part is get the player to, when they press E, it changes this parameter. That's really what's going to happen. Another little fun note about where you'll be at the end of experiment 2 is you'll have multiple prefabs. So I can go ahead and drop in multiple prefabs into my scene here, and they all can be positioned and moved at different locations, at different positions in the level, and they'll all function independently. So I can go ahead and hit play, and now I can go and find the animator for each one of those game objects. Just go ahead and open these up. Alright, so I can select the turbine animator here in the back and then hit play, or hit the toggle spin, and it will start spinning that one. Alright, I can select this one here and hit toggle spin, and it will trigger that one. So each one works independently. I apologize, this is a little bit of a slideshow for those that are watching live as I'm streaming the game engine, but you can test this out on your end and see that as you move the objects and as you move each piece, that the animation still works as intended. Alright, the reason is because our animated object here, turbine animator, is a child of this prefab. So we can move this prefab anywhere in the level, and this is still going to animate in local space to this game object, to its parent. That's why I have you set up the hierarchy that way, so you can move this anywhere in the world and the animation will still work local to that object. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and delete these extras. We're just going to work with the one wind turbine for now. And now the first thing we want to do when we're going to change things in Unity is check them out in Perforce. So jump back over to Perforce, and I'm going to get my scene file as well as the meta file and check those out. And then for this exercise, I'm also going to show you guys the revert unchanged files. So this is a really helpful action. It's a really nice workflow to use when you move forward into other courses working on projects. I'm going to select this wind turbine folder and check out the whole folder. That way, if I need to change my idle animations or anything in here, I have it checked out, ready to go. Right? I got the prefab checked out, I got my mesh checked out. All of those assets for my wind turbine have been checked out. And these will be, you will complete these in experiment 1 and 2 if you haven't already. Alright, so back in Unity, we're going to find your control station, and inside your control station, we're going to create an empty game object. Alright, that'll create it as a child of control station. We're going to go ahead and name this control trigger. Control trigger. This is going to be our trigger volume the player has to stand in. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a box collider. Alright, and we're going to position this around the button. So just move it over, move it so it's in front of the button. Right, the player is going to have to stand in this volume in order to actually activate the wind turbine. So make sure it's roughly, large enough for the player to get inside of. Alright, so we have this box collider component. If we just hit play right now, we'll run into it like an invisible wall. We want to turn on is trigger, so now we can use this as a trigger volume. Alright, that boolean right there. So now we're going to add a new component to this game object. We're going to add a new script. And I'm just going to call this control turbine. All right, go ahead and create that. Now I have a script on the game object. So I'm going to go ahead and open the script, and the first thing we're going to set up is making sure that the trigger volume is recognizing the player. To do that, the first thing we're going to use is a Boolean, right? A Boolean has a true and false value. So when the player's in the volume, we're going to set it to be true. And when they leave the volume, we're going to set it to be false. All right. So there we go. We're in Visual Studios now. So I'm just going to create a private Boolean. This is here. All right, so I have this Boolean. Now I'm going to create a new function down here. It's going to be private void on trigger enter. All right, and it passes in a collider, and then the name of that object that's entering is going to be other. So I'm just going to check to see if the other object, so if other.tag equals player, and this is a string, so we need to put it in quotes. So if the tag is set to player, we're going to set is here equals to true. So is here equals true. So now I'm just going to copy this function and paste. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to add a debug log. So debug.log, the player is in the volume. The player has entered. Has entered, because on trigger enter will happen one single frame. The frame I actually enter. So now I'm going to copy that and paste. Switch this from enter to exit. And if you're not familiar with tags, I'll show you in Unity where that's actually assigned. Say the player has left the volume. And now let's save and test it and see if our trigger volume is actually recognizing the player. So if you load the Scraps Outpost, let's switch over to the console. So on the inside of the character, as core character container, you'll see player character. This is already tagged player for you, but you'll see every game object in Unity has a tag that you can assign in the inspector. This is really an easy way to group or categorize objects, and then you can check what an object's tag is through a script and only have certain objects be affecting to certain interactions. So now let's go ahead and set the outpost to be active. And let's just see if I can walk up to this thing and it recognizes me as a player. If you're not already using the shortcut to jump over to the checkpoint, you can hit escape when the level starts. Click on IND2 experiments, and then click escape again, and it will jump you over to that checkpoint. So you don't have to walk over every single time. So now when I walk into the volume, it should tell me that I have entered and exited the volume. There's every time I enter, it prints. Every time I leave, it prints again. So now you know that there are that the trigger is recognizing the players there. Right. So now we need to actually get access to this game object. And when I say this game object, what I'm referring to is this turbine animator. Okay, so if you think about what we're trying to do and break it down step by step, this will really help you start to design and build some of your own interactions and your own setups. So this component, right, this animator component has this toggle spin parameter. This is what we want to change. So we need to get access to this parameter. Well, like I just said, this parameter lives in a component. Here we have this animator component. This is what we need to get access to. This component exists on this game object, the turbine animator. So in our script, the first thing we're going to do is get access to that game object. we're going to say public game object, and let's call this turbine anim. Alright, and then we're going to have a private animator. This is going to be our animator component. I'm just going to call this anim. So in start, actually before I even do that, let's just save. I created a public game object. Let's go ahead and assign that in Unity. So remember, this is on our script. Our script is on our trigger volume because that's what we're entering and exiting. So now we have the spot for a game object. So I'm going to drag and drop my turbine animator, give it a second for it to catch up, into that variable. So now every time I'm talking about turbine anim in my script, I'm referring to this game object. Alright, so now back in our script, in start, I'm going to say anim, which is our component, equals turbine anim dot get component animator, and this is a function, so we need parentheses and a semicolon. So now anim equals that component that's on our game object. Anim is now referring to this animator component here. Alright, that's on this game object. Alright, so we're really just breaking down the pieces, right? We get the game object, then we get access to its component, and now we can change that component when we want to. We want it to happen when the player's in the volume and when they press the E key. Well, you'll notice we've already checking for if we already have a variable, a boolean, for if they're in the volume. This is here. So now let's use it. We're going to create a new function, so private void, and I'm going to call this toggle turbine anim, because that's just going to toggle the animation. Alright, so now inside of this function, we're going to say our if statement, right? First we're going to check for if the player's in the volume. Well, we know the player's in the volume when is here equals true. So if is here equals true, now we can use the double ampersand, so shift 7, we use that ampersand to say and, right? So if the player's in the volume and they press the E key, that's input dot get key, and then the key code we want, so key code dot, and then the key we want to press, so in this case we just want to press E. Alright, so if they're in the volume and they press E, now we want to check for the value of our boolean, right? So in Unity we have this toggle spin, this parameter. We want to check to see if this is false. If it's false when they press E, we want to set it to true, which will activate the wind turbine. So I'm going to say if, and now we want to get access to the component, so anim, and then .get bool to get the boolean, and now we want to say what is the boolean we want to get. Now this is where the spelling is super important. Because it's a string, we need to make sure it matches exactly. Notice here how there's a lowercase t and a capital S. That has to match exactly here in Unity with a lowercase t and a capital S. So make sure when you're referencing those variables that it matches. So if the boolean equals false, now we're going to set it. So to set it, we're going to say anim.setBool. And now what's the boolean we want to set? The same one, toggle spin. And now comma, the value we want to set it to. We want to set it to true. Alright, so whether you're using an integer or a float or a boolean, it's all the same concepts. Get is to return the value and check the value, and set is to actually change it. So now we have this function, but we need to call it somewhere. So we're going to call this function in update. Alright, so that way this function's constantly running, and we're going to check for if in the volume and they press E. So now I'm just going to add a debug log so we can see it in the console this is working. I'm just going to say the player has activated the turbine. Alright, so save that, and now let's test it and see if I can actually turn this thing on. Anybody have any questions so far? Let's walk up to it. Now I press E. See, it's activated. Now it's turned on. I press E though, and it's not turning off. Alright, so that's the next thing we can add in. So now to get that to work, we can add in an else statement. Alright, so now it's also really important we keep the else statement inside of this main if. Right? So first thing is we're going to check to see if they're in the volume and press E. Once we do that, we're going to then check to see if toggle spin is false. Else would be if it's not false, right? So if it's not false, it's what? If it's not false, it's true, right? So the else would only happen when it's true. So when it's set to true, we want to set the Boolean to false. And then let's just switch this to deactivated. So I can save, and then play. So these overall concepts of interacting, whether it's a wind turbine or an entryway or a pressure plate or a generator, whatever the object is that's animating, the concepts are overall the same. Is set up these states and then interact with the system and then change your parameters to change the states based on when you want it to happen. So now you can see down below in the log, as well as when I press E, I'm able to turn this on and then press E again and turn it off. Alright, so we got something working. But now let's go ahead and give a little player feedback, right? It's a little quiet. We want there to be some sound effects. So let's go ahead and on our control trigger, we are going to add a new audio source, add a new component. All right, so we're going to turn off play on awake, and in this audio source, we're just going to assign the turn on sound effect. Alright, so now we have this audio source, but we need it to play, right? We want this sound to play when the player interacts. So, just like we have a private audio source, we're going to do the same thing, or a private animator, we're going to do the same thing for our audio source. So private audio source, and I'm just going to call this control audio. And this is also something that starts to become pretty natural as you go forward. Whether it's an animator, an audio source, a transform, a light, whatever component it is that you're trying to interact with, it's the same concept. So have a variable, assign that variable to the component you want to affect, and then change it at the right time. Alright, so you might notice a difference between these two lines. On line 19, I say anim equals turbine anim dot get component. When here on line 20, I just say control audio equals get component. So the difference between these two is pretty big. This is referring to the component on this game object, on turbine anim. Remember, that was a game object we assigned here in the inspector in Unity. When I just say get component, I'm referring to myself, right? So this is really where object-oriented programming comes in, to where we put the script on our trigger volume. So when I say get component, I'm saying get the component, get the audio source on the trigger volume, on the same game object that has the script. That's the difference between these two. Alright, so now we have access to the audio source. So now let's just say inside here, control audio dot play, as well as down here, let's say control audio dot play, and give this a test. So now I should hear one sound effect when I interact. pressed it twice there. Alright, so now every time I press E, you should hear a sound effect as it turns on, as well as when it turns off, right? But now let's get a sound effect for when the turbine's actually spinning, right? As long as there's a motion, we want there to be some movement. So now open up the prefab, and on our animator, let's go ahead and make sure we have an audio source. So on your turbine animator game object, inside of your prefab, right? So I really recommend you work inside of the prefab editor once you make it into a prefab. So now it's just an easy way to change this. So on your turbine animator, I'm going to add an audio source. And this one we're going to set to loop. This is going to be a wind sound that's going to play ambiently while the wind turbine is moving. Alright, so I just turned on loop. I assigned the wind loop audio clip into the audio source. So think of the audio clip as like the CD or the the track coming out of the speaker, right? The audio source is like the speakers in your car or a boombox or something actually emitting the sound. So I always recommend you do have access to 3D sounds down here, this slider, to put your audio source on the thing making the noise. So if you have a motor that's running, put the audio source on that game object, not on some other object somewhere else in the world. So now we have that component. Let's go ahead and, just like we did in our script, let's set up the audio to work. Alright, so the same thing, we're going to have a private audio source. And just call this wind audio. And now in start, we're going to say wind audio. Oops. Wind audio equals turbine anim, because remember that's on our turbine animator. So turbine anim get component audio source. So now every time we talk about wind audio, we're talking about that audio source on that game object. So inside play, or inside when we activate, we're going to just say wind audio dot play. And now we don't want to play it again when we turn it off. We want it to stop. So let's say wind audio dot stop. Alright, so now let's test it out. And then there'll be one more piece we're going to add for the third experiment. Alright, so I walk up to it now and press E. There we go. Once it activates, you can hear the wind in the background. Just like an ambient wind noise. And once I press E and it turns off. Let me do one more test. It might just be I'm having issues. It might be because my frame rate is a little slow because I'm recording at the same time. That's why it's almost like pressing twice. But when it is successful, it does turn off. Let's try one more time. There we go, turns on. Alright, so let's add in one final piece. Let's add in the audio swapping. So we have this audio source here that's playing the turn-on sound effect, but we want to play a different sound effect based on whether it's on or off. So rather than having a whole other game object with another audio source, we can switch out this clip dynamically right before the sound effect plays. So in our script, let's just create two public audio clips. Audio clip, let's call this turn on, and then this one public audio clip equals turn off. Alright, so I'm just going to save, jump back into Unity, and I'm going to assign those variables. So in your wind turbine folder that I provided to you guys, you should have those audio clips. So inside your wind turbine folder, there's the 3 sounds. So turn on and turn on, turn off and turn off. So we have those clips, right? And we have those as a variable. Now, inside here, right before we play the sound effect, I can say control audio, which is, remember, that's our component, and say dot to get access to the component's attributes. So I'm going to say the clip, and then set that equal to turn on. So now we're setting the clip to turn on, and then we play the sound effect. Just going to copy that line, come down here, and right before we play the sound, we're going to switch this to turn off, right? So set the clip to turn on, and then play, and then set the clip to false. Or sorry, set the clip to turn off, and then play. Alright, so now let's save that, and I'm going to have the trigger selected so you can see in the audio source here that it's changing dynamically. This now technically means that we don't even have to have a clip assigned there on start, because it's going to automatically be assigned when we interact. But now you can see I walk up to it and press E. Yeah, there's definitely something with my frame rate's giving me a problem. There you see it turns on, it plays the sound, I press E again, and hopefully you can hear it plays a different sound effect and stops. I think with GoTo and Unity running right now, my computer's pretty much pressing and cycling through right away. Actually, one thing I can change, let's try to switch this from get key to get key up. I think that might be my problem. Maybe not just my frame rate. Let's try again. Because get key is, I think that is the issue, because that is going to continually run as long as the key is held. So it's like a machine gun firing bullets. It's going to continually run that function as long as it's held. Alright, so now I try again. There we go. Alright, much more consistent. Definitely not my computer, just user error. So make that a little bit better. Now you can hear those different sounds, right? And that's the completion of the 3rd experiment. So now I'm going to submit to Perforce. So remember with scripts, anytime you make a script, Unity will just dump it in your assets folder. So make sure you move this into your wind turbine folder. Should have everything built for this activity inside this folder. I'm also going to just save my scene. Save scene. Come back into Perforce, and because I checked out my scene beforehand and I checked out everything, right, I want to first make sure I come over and add the script. So refresh, and there's the script there. Go ahead and mark that for add. And rather than just submitting right away, one thing that you can now do, because we have this whole thing checked out, maybe you had to go in and tweak any of your animations or adjust something. You can see my prefab has changed because I added that audio source and things like that. So that you can see with the newer version of Perforce, the icons are actually blue for the files that have been changed. So what I can do now is select this change list, right-click, and revert unchanged files. This is going to keep anything that's still exactly the same in the same state on the depot. There's no need to submit the exact same revision of a file if it's not changed. So please avoid checking out your entire project, changing a few files, and then submitting. It's just starting to add additional revisions to the depot when you don't really need that. Alright, so now I'm going to submit. I'm just saying completed wind turbine turbine experiment 3 and submit. So up until this point, you should be able to select your scene and look in the history and see revision for each activity, each experiment. You can see my control station, then experiment 1, 2, and 3 for the wind turbine. Remember, whatever you have selected is what you're going to see the history on. Then also in the wind turbine folder, you should have added your prefab and animations for experiments 1 and 2. And then experiment 3 will have your script, as well as it should also have your changed prefab, any edits that you made. Alright, so I'm just going to wait a second or two to see if anyone has any questions about the third experiment or any of the concepts behind it. If you want me to go over them again, I'd be more than happy to, because this is definitely the foundation of just creating interactions for your scraps level or for levels in level design. This is one way to go about doing it, is using animations with trigger volumes. Any questions so far? So Michael says, so everything should be added to the wind turbine folder? Yes, for this activity, for the wind turbine experiments 1 through 4, you want to have everything contained to this folder. So basically this folder that we've imported at the beginning of the month has all of these separate subfolders for each assignment you're going to work on. Think about it this way, Michael, when you get to level design, this folder here that has IND229, this would be like the Andrew O'Connor LVD folder. And now when I go and build in my level design project, I add all my pieces to that folder. So this month I provide you guys a folder structure just so it makes it easy for me to check off the assignments on Perforce to make sure they're there, as well as a way for you to just submit your files to certain locations without having to worry about organizing it yourself. But next month, or when you get to level design, you're going to have your own folder in your project, and you can organize it however you'd like. Have your prefabs and prefabs, scripts and scripts, materials and materials, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, for this course, have each activity have all of the assets you use in that specific folder, please. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and start on the fourth experiment. So to get started, again, I'm just going to check out my wind turbine folder that has all of my assets for the wind turbine, as well as the experiment scene itself, because the scene's actually changing. All right. So this fourth experiment is a bit of a bonus. It's a nice way to add a little bit more feedback to the game overall and to your interactions. In level design, they talk about 3 forms of feedback, 3 forms of player feedback. So one would be audio, having some type of audio. The other would be visual. So either something animating or a particle effect, or like text would be a message through the UI, some type of way to communicate. So animation events are one way to add some level of communication. So Daniel's having trouble snapping the control panel together. No worries. If you're having issues with snapping a specific face, all right, so I'm going to go ahead and open up Pro Builder. So if I select this individual face here and move it, right, I can hold down V to then basically choose an axis. So I'm going to choose the X handle here, and now wherever I move my mouse, it might kind of freak out at first, like you saw it jumps all the way back. Now it's about where my mouse is located. I want to put my mouse on an actual vertex. So I'm going to hover right over this vertex, or like this one here, and it's going to snap to that position, flush in that axis. So if I want to move this, make it flush with this piece here, right, I can do so by doing it that way. So hold V, and normally you can you can grab in the center, but you can grab just one specific axis and align it that way. All right, so the fourth experiment is all about animation events. Really, any function you can think of, any type of function can be called through an animation event. So how we just set up the audio to work is the audio is going to play at the very beginning of the animation, right? As soon as you press E, the animation or the sound is going to play. That's just how the script is set up, right? That's just how it was designed. An animation event could be a cool way to play an audio source halfway through an animation or at a specific point. Pretty much an animation event allows you to call a function at any point during the animation. So whatever you can come up with in that function, you can call it. So what we're going to do is we're going to have this glowing button here change from red to green as the player turns on the wind turbine. So to do so, we're actually going to open up the prefab editor, and on the turbine animator, this game object is going to have a new script. So I'm going to call this turbine events. Oops, is that already? So make a new script. So the game object that has your animator also needs to have the script that holds all of your animation events. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have the button change from red to green, as well as we're going to have the light change from red to green. Alright, so we can actually delete, start, and update. We're not going to need these at all. Alright, and we can just say public game object, and we're just going to call this big button. This is going to be the game object for the button itself. Then we can say private renderer, and call this button rend. So the material of a game object, oops, let me go to my button. Where is it? There it is. So the material of a game object actually lives on the mesh renderer. You'll see there its actual material exists inside of there. So that's why we need to actually get access to the renderer. We can also create a public light and call this button light. And then we're going to just create a public material green, and then public material red. Alright, so now let's assign some variables in our script, or in our inspector. So the button is just going to be the game object for our button. The light is the light right above our button, this point light. I'm just going to call this button light. Let's rename it real quick. Drop that in there. And then the red and green materials. So these might be, your red materials should be in your control station folder. And if you don't have a green one, just go ahead and duplicate your red and just switch the color to green and assign those into there. Alright, so now we have those materials and we have those variables. Let's go ahead and actually create our functions. So we will actually need a start. And here we're just going to say button rend equals big button dot get component, and then this equals the renderer. So now every time we talk about button rend, we're referring to the renderer on our button object. So now we can create our function. Let's call this private void button to red. Alright, so we're going to, first thing is to say button rend equals, button rend dot material equals red. And then we can say button light dot color equals color dot red. So there are some default colors that you can use. You know, there's like red, yellow, white, green, gray. If you want to do custom colors, you can do color 32, and then you'd put in the actual. You just do open close parentheses, and actually can set up a custom color that way. I would do button light dot color 32, I believe. But for now, I'm just going to do red. Alright, and then we can also adjust, and this is just an extra thing, the button's light, the button intensity, and range, if you'd like to. So inside the component, you'll see here's the range and the intensity. The intensity is how bright it is. You could even do like an animation if you wanted it to like pulsate, right, and animate that. And the range is how far that light will emit. So you can change those dynamically if you want to. So let's, 23 is way too bright. Let's keep it at 3. Let's see how that looks. So when it's red, let's say button light dot intensity equals 3. And now let's create one for when it's green. So private void button, switch this, button to green, and let's just say button rend dot material equals green, button light dot color equals color dot green, and then button light, that's a minus, it's be equals, and then button light dot intensity, and let's just turn up the intensity a little bit when it's green. Alright, so now we have these two functions. We have button to red and we have button to green. We have these two. Let's actually just add a debug so we'll see it in the console. Debug.log. The button is green, or is red. Switch this to the button is green. Alright, so now we have these two functions. So let's jump back into Unity now. And in our animation window, let's select the turbine animator, right? Because this has our events, remember? So this little button here is how you add a keyframe. It looks like a little diamond. Alright, right to the right of that is a little thing that looks like a tooth. This is one way you can add an animation event. You can also right-click in the timeline and add an animation event here. Once you do that, you see this little tooth. You see this little tooth in your timeline. You can move to any point, right, at any point in time. If you look in the inspector, you have a function that you can select, right, and there are those functions we made, button to red and button to green. So in idle, we're going to set the button to be red, and then in wind up, as soon as it turns on, we're going to set the button to green. If you want to take this a step further and have it be yellow while it's turning on and then green while it's spinning, feel free to do that. Or also feel free to try and use some type of animation event in your entryway, right? Have something change color. This would also be great for having a sound play, like at the end, like have the door close and then right when the latch closes, there's a sound that plays. Alright, so now let's see if this works. So now I press E. Okay, so it looks like the light changed, but the button itself didn't. So this is actually a little bug with Pro Builder. Because this object isn't a prefab, it's still a Pro Builder object. I can show you guys how to fix this. So see how there's two material slots in the mesh renderer? So what we're first going to do is set this to 1. Alright, you'll see your button will disappear, but don't worry, it's not gonna be broken. So now manually what you'll do is set the red material. So set it to be red, and it's still not going to show up. That's okay. We're going to now apply it with the material editor. So Tools, Pro Builder. I can even just go here to. Just got to open it. Material Editor, and then apply the red button. So you'll see your button will come back, and you only have one slot in the mesh renderer. So if you're having trouble, if you ran into the same issue you just saw me have, I do have that a little fix in the assignment where you just want to resize that element. So now when I walk up to it, I should press E now, and it turns green. You can also see now in the mesh renderer over here, you see it says button to green, or it says green button as the material, right? And I press E again, and it goes back to red, right? And you can see in my console, right, I've got those, the button is green. I should continually get the button is red. Yep, I'm continually getting the button is red over and over again as it sits in the idle state. Alright, so just a nice way to add some player feedback, right? Starting to feel more like an interaction. I set this up with my campus students, but since we're here and now I've got something, so let me show you guys. I can position this camera here. So there we go. Let me position it so I can see the wind turbine. Alright, so on this camera, all I did here was I set up a texture, right? So in my project, I created a new, let's see, custom render, or create a render texture. So basically this camera, whatever the camera sees, is going to render to this texture. And then I use that texture to basically apply that render texture to a material. And then all I did with that material was I applied it to this face right here on this game object. So now I should be able to, adjust this, and whatever this is seeing will be displayed on my security monitor over here. So another little thing that I added in, if you're wondering how I got that, let's play and see if it updates. Let me see if I can reassign the material. Confirm others. So I'm going to go ahead and save. Let me see if I apply this to another game object. Okay, so something up with that material. I'm just going to try to make a new material real quick. Alright, so apply that. Let me just select the face and apply that. I guess it's just the overall, it's the UVs of the object I need to adjust to get it to show up how I'm expecting it to. Oops. Alrighty. But anyways, I'm going to go ahead and submit what I have so far. So save my scene and come back into Perforce. Alright, so you should, actually before I forget, I almost forgot about my script, right? Remember the script gets dumped in the assets folder. I'm going to move it into wind turbine. So make sure that the only new asset you made for experiment 4 is that new script. But you did update things like your prefab in the scene, and even look, you got the idle and wind-up animations are changed because they've been the new animation event. So now I'm just going to refresh, add my turbine event script, mark for add, come over to my pending change list again, and I can just revert unchanged files. This will pull out anything that's still exactly the same. You'll see now I have my prefab, my wind-up and idle, the turbine event script, and my scene. So I can go ahead and submit, saying completed, wind turbine experiment 4, hit submit. So now you should have both of your scripts in your wind turbine folder. You should have the scene submitted after each experiment. Again, I can select the scene and look in the history and see that. And the last thing I need to do is make a build. So what you're going to do is come to your folder in the depot, and this will be the same for anyone that's already done Control Station, where you're going to mark for delete on your build. Remember, delete your compiled folder, not your working folder. So mark that for delete and then submit, saying removing build. This is going to delete it from the depot and from your workspace. So now if you look in your workspace, you have this empty folder, but there's no build. Alright, so what you're going to do now is come back into Unity and go to File, Build Settings, and they should be in the same order. Go ahead and hit build. Should be the same order as project setup and as Control Station. And now it should also remember where you saved it last, right? So make sure you're saving it in your compiled folder and select that folder. And then once this finishes, I'm just going to mark that for add. Select my folder and mark for add and submit after I've tested it, of course. Alright, so I really recommend and encourage you guys to try and get these wind turbine activities done. Knock them out as soon as you can. You saw there I got through pretty much most of the third and fourth experiment in just about an hour. And yes, I've done this a bunch before, but definitely should be something you guys can complete. Get the experiment 1 through 4 done as soon as you can, so you have enough time to work on your entryway and ask any questions about about what you're building or any issues you run into. Alright, so you see now that the build finished, I can just double click on it. I'm just going to run it real quick to make sure that it has the wind turbine and that it works. Just want to double check my work. Alright, so I walk up to and press E. It changes to green and turns on, and press E again, and it turns off. Alright, and plays that different sound. Alright, so those are those three bullets that I'm looking for. So you don't have to submit a build for experiment 1 and 2, but you do need to submit a build afterwards for experiment 3 and 4. So now I'm going to select my folder inside compiled and mark for add, and then submit. I'm saying submission for wind turbine experiments. Alright, and then lastly, while I have you guys here, once this submits, I will show you one more time how to test what's on the depot. It's really, really important. So you'll see this. This was in project setup. This set of steps, but I have it again in the entryway because I want everyone to definitely test their work after it's been turned in to make sure it's opening correctly and that what's on the depot works. So this, where to go? This section here, right? So replacing the compiled build on the depot, that's what I just did, where I deleted the build, went into Unity, made a new one, and then hit mark for add and submitted it. This section here, to testing your build on the depot, right? This is what you should do because this is how I will test your work, is you can go into the File Explorer. So once this submits, I can come over here and just delete all of this stuff. Delete this from my computer. Then use the get revision force operation to copy it back into your workspace. And then you can open it up and actually just double click on the executable and run it again. That way you're testing exactly what is on the depot and not what you think is or what's on your computer. You're actually able to test what you submitted to Perforce, so you know I will be grading the correct submission. Alright, any questions at all so far? Any questions about what we talked about today? Anything? David asked how long my lectures are on campus. They're scheduled for 2 hours, and most of the time I do the full 2-hour session. So like anytime you see the playlists, so for example, so yeah, they're average of 2 hours, and it's twice a week. But then like tomorrow will be like a shorter, kind of like what we did today, like a 1-hour lecture, just to let everyone actually work on their assignments, give everyone time to actually work on things. But that's funny. It's interesting you asked that because I have tried to design the course as best as possible so where it's the same. It's like the same exact thing in a way. So inside design tasks, and you look in level design document, this section right here, session 1 lecture video playlist, that's exactly my very first lecture on campus, just broken up into videos. Like it's the exact same material. So these conference calls, I'm like adding in small sections of material that I didn't quite have to try and make it exact from campus to online. But all of my online material and slides, you guys do have access through. They're just in each actual assignment. All right. Anybody have any other questions? just going to let this submission finish, and then I'm going to go ahead and get this recording up on YouTube. So thanks to everyone for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Anthony through Discord or FSO, and we'll be here to help you out.